Hey guys, in tonight's video we dive into the story of what it was like to live in medieval times and why you probably wouldn't make it a day. Before we get started, please take a moment to like and subscribe if you enjoy this type of content. Also comment if there is a topic you would like me to cover and where you are watching from and what time it is for you. I am very grateful for every one of you and hope you enjoy tonight's story. We take for granted how great life is today. We have warm beds to sleep in, YouTube stories to fall asleep to, and nice hot showers to relax in. Let's dive into the hard life and harsh reality of the medieval times. Imagine opening your eyes and instantly regretting it, because the first thing you see is a wooden beam ceiling, a thatch roof leaking slightly, and a hay-filled mattress that smells like goat sweat and regret. The sun's barely up, but the rooster's already screaming like it's auditioning for a horror movie, and your back feels like you've been body slammed by a knight. You try to stretch, but your limbs are stiff from sleeping on what basically amounts to a wooden board with straw. No memory foam, no pillows. Unless you count a lumpy sack stuffed with old rags. You roll over to get up and immediately notice your feet are freezing. Because surprise! There's no insulation and the stone floor's colder than your ex's heart. There's no bathroom either. If you gotta go, you do it in a chamber pot, which is basically a fancy word for a bucket, and you're praying nobody knocked it over during the night. The air inside your hut is thick, musty, and filled with the scent of damp wood, sweat, animals, and 10 people who haven't bathed in a week. You're probably sharing this one-room home with your entire family, and maybe a goat or two. Because privacy isn't a thing yet. No locks, no bedrooms, just vibes and body odour. You can hear someone outside sharpening something, probably a sickle or axe, and someone else is yelling in a dialect you don't understand because you're stuck in a region that speaks a mutated form of Old English. Your stomach growls, but you already know there's not going to be a breakfast spread waiting for you. No cereal, no pancakes, not even a sad granola bar. At best, someone left a chunk of yesterday's bread by the fire, and it's rock hard because preservatives haven't been invented. You might wash it down with ale since water could literally kill you. Yeah, drink water and risk cholera, or drink warm flat beer and risk judgment from modern people. You go with the ale, as you're putting on your clothes, which feel like sandpaper dipped in disappointment. You realise there's no underwear, and your tunic smells worse than the chamber pot. Everything's itchy, everything's wool, and you've got fleas biting places you don't want to talk about. You try to wash your face, but the water in the bucket is icy and suspiciously murky. There's a chunk of something floating in it. Do you ask questions? No. You just splash it on and pretend it's refreshing. There's no soap, no toothbrush, no deodorant. If you're lucky, someone made lye soap last week, but it burns like fire if it touches your eyes or any sensitive skin. You take a deep breath. Bad move, because now the goat's in your personal space and it's chewing on your sleeve. You push it away and head outside, where it's muddy, the chickens are going berserk, and someone's kid is crying over a wooden toy that broke in half. Welcome to a regular Tuesday. The sky's grey, the wind is sharp, and there's manure everywhere. You try not to slip, but it's too late. Your foot lands right in something squishy, and now your one pair of shoes smells worse than your breath. Speaking of which, your mouth feels like you ate a bag of mothballs. You wonder if anyone brushed their teeth back then. They didn't. They might have chewed on sticks or rubbed ashes on their gums, but fluoride wasn't even a twinkle in science's eye. You try not to think about cavities because dentists are basically butchers with pliers. And you've heard horror stories about people getting teeth yanked out while being held down by relatives. Now imagine waking up like this every single day. No heating, no plumbing, no coffee, no phone to doom scroll on, no light switch to flip. Just you, your lice, and a hard day of labour ahead. You realise pretty fast that the Middle Ages wasn't some romantic fantasy. It was survival mode 24/7. And if you're not part of the nobility, then guess what? You've got no say, no rights, and zero chance of ever leaving this village, unless it's by marriage or death. Probably death. You glance toward the woods, where the trees look thick and spooky, and you remember people believe in fairies and demons and witches, so no one's going in there without a crucifix and a prayer. It's not even 7 a.m, and you already want to go back to sleep. Or better yet, go back to the future. But there's no button to press, no time machine, just cold feet, a growling stomach, and a full day of medieval madness waiting to beat you down. And that, my friend, is how your first morning in the Middle Ages begins, with misery, mud, and medieval mayhem. You haven't even made it to lunchtime, and you're already questioning all your life choices. So you've made it out of bed, barely, and now your stomach's growling like a wild boar, demanding something, anything, to eat. But you're in medieval times, and that means breakfast isn't eggs and bacon, or a cinnamon roll the size of your head. It's probably just bread. Not the fluffy, warm sourdough stuff from a hip bakery either. This bread is dense, dark, and hard enough to chip a tooth if you bite wrong. It might be made with barley, rye, or oats, depending on what's available. But wheat, that's for rich people, my dude. You're not getting croissants here. You're gnawing on a piece of crust that was baked 3 days ago and stored in a dusty bin near the fire, soaking up smoke and stray ash. And if you want something to wash it down with, surprise, it's ale again. Warm, weak ale that everyone drinks because the water is more cursed than your decision to time travel here. This isn't a relaxing brunch, it's survival. Maybe if you're lucky and someone caught something yesterday, there's a sliver of cheese or a bit of lard to spread on your bread, but don't count on it. Butter is rare. Milk, you're not going to drink it unless it came out of the cow 5 minutes ago, because refrigeration hasn't been invented yet and sour milk is a fast ticket to stomach doom. You glance at the table, and by table, I mean a wooden plank propped on 2 stumps, and see what the family has gathered. Some mush made of oats or peas if it's a big day, or dried beans soaking in cold water that may or may not have little things floating in it. And remember, you're not eating alone. You're probably sitting shoulder to shoulder with 5 or 6 family members, plus a toddler trying to lick the table, and a grandmother muttering about omens. Also, there's no napkins. You wipe your hands on your tunic, the same one you slept in, worked in, and will probably be buried in. And plates? Maybe. If you're lucky, you get a wooden bowl. More likely, you're eating from a shared pot with your fingers, or a spoon carved from a stick. Everyone double dips and nobody even pretends to care. It's medieval bonding. You look around and wonder if this is it. If this sad little crust of bread and warm ale is all you get today. And the answer is mostly yes. You'll probably have 2 meals total. One in the morning and one in the evening, because lunch isn't really a thing yet, unless you're a noble. And you are absolutely not a noble. Nobles eat meat, sweet pies, roasted birds stuffed with herbs you've never heard of. You eat whatever can be scraped together from the garden or begged off a neighbour. Meat is for feast days, and unless it's a holiday or someone important just died, you're not getting any. If you do manage to get meat, it's either salted to death, dried out, or still has feathers on it. You know how sometimes you burn a pizza and eat it anyway? Yeah, that's the best case scenario here. But you don't complain, because complaining doesn't fix anything. It just gets you slapped by someone who's more tired and hungrier than you. So you eat in silence, chewing slowly, praying the bread hasn't turned mouldy in the middle, and trying not to think about how this is your meal until sunset. And don't even think about dessert. Sugar is insanely expensive, and only used in tiny amounts by rich folks or monasteries that happen to trade with spice merchants. Honey? Maybe. But bees aren't just chilling in hives waiting for you to ask nicely. You have to risk your life and your face to go get it. So yeah, no waffles, no fruit parfaits, no sweet snacks to give you energy. Just bread. More bread. And maybe some boiled greens if it's spring, and someone foraged something weird from the woods. And you better eat fast too, because chores are calling. You don't get to sit around and sip your drink or scroll TikTok while you digest. Nah, it's time to start working before the sun fully rises. If you're a farmer, you head to the fields. If you're an apprentice, you go to the workshop. If you're a kid, guess what? You're already helping churn butter or grind grain or carry buckets of something heavy. Breakfast is not a relaxing affair. It's a pit stop before the next 12 hours of exhaustion. And just in case you thought skipping breakfast would help, think again. If you don't eat now, there's a good chance you'll faint by noon and someone will just drag you to the side and hope you wake up later. There's no snacks, no vending machines, no quick pick-me-ups. Just work, hunger, and the faint hope that tonight's dinner will be a little better than last night's. Spoiler, it won't be. So you finish your chunk of misery bread, take one last sip of lukewarm beer, and sigh. Because breakfast is over, and your medieval day has only just begun. So you've eaten your sad slice of bread, and now it's time to get dressed for the day, except there's no closet, no dresser, and definitely no mirror. You don't pick out an outfit, you just grab the only clothes you own and hope they're dry. Fashion in the Middle Ages wasn't about style or expression. It was about not freezing to death, and maybe not getting lice today. If you're a peasant, you've got one tunic, one belt, and maybe some hose if you're lucky. And no, hose doesn't mean pantyhose. It's more like itchy leg socks made of rough wool that sag after 10 steps. Your shirt, made of linen if you're fancy, scratchy wool if you're not. Underwear? Ha ha ha, what underwear? You might have a linen undertunic that acts like a base layer, but most folks just go commando and pray for mild weather. The tunic is long, clumsy and weirdly tight in the worst places. It rubs your armpits raw and catches on everything. And shoes, they're not shoes, they're a bad idea shaped like footwear. Medieval shoes were more like leather pancakes wrapped around your feet, sometimes tied with strips of hide, with soles so thin you might as well be barefoot. No support, no grip, no arch, just soft leather between your toes and every rock, stick and pile of horse poop you step in. And socks? What socks? You stuff your feet into your shoes and hope for the best. But nobles, you ask? Surely they had better options. Technically, yes, if you were rich you got slightly better wool, more vibrant colours, maybe even some embroidery. But you also had to wear layers upon layers of hot, heavy, expensive fabric to show off. Fancy clothes were a status symbol, not a comfort item. Rich people wore silk, fur and brocade, but guess what? That stuff was itchy too, and heavy. Ever try hauling yourself upstairs in a £15 velvet robe? It's like fighting your own clothes. Also, nobles loved to wear pointy shoes and weird hats. The shoes were so long and curled at the toes, they had to be tied to the knees to stay up. Imagine trying to run from a fire in clown slippers that slapped the ground like fish. No thanks. Women had it even worse. If you were a peasant woman, you wore a long dress that dragged through the mud, got caught in every thorn bush, and trapped heat like a bread oven. Add a head covering too. Most women had to wear wimples or veils to hide their hair, because showing it was scandalous unless you were married. And even then only. A little. And don't even get started on noble women. They had gowns that required help to put on, corset-like belts, sleeves so long they dragged across the floor, and shoes that weren't made for walking, more like stumbling in style. You had to be rich just to afford someone to help you get dressed. But even the rich couldn't escape the bugs. Fleas and lice didn't care how much your tunic cost. Everyone had them. Clothes were rarely washed and almost never changed. You might wear the same thing every day for weeks, especially in winter, when taking your clothes off was basically inviting hypothermia or pneumonia. Washing wool was a nightmare. It shrank, warped and smelled like wet sheep. Linen was better, but it was expensive and still rough. The truth is, no one in medieval times was comfortable. Every outfit was a compromise between freezing and itching. There were no stretchy fabrics, no soft cotton tees, no elastic waistbands to save the day. It was all scratchy, stiff and shaped weird. Belts were used not for fashion, but for keeping your clothes from falling off while working. And if you were a tradesman or soldier, you carried tools, weapons or pouches tied to it like a human tool rack. Hats were less about fashion and more about survival. People wore coifs, tight little caps, hoods, or giant felt monstrosities to keep the rain or sun off their heads. But the wind still got in, and once it rained you were soaked for hours. No Gore-Tex, no umbrellas, just damp wool clinging to your soul. and jewellery. Only the rich had it, and most of it was uncomfortable or curse-looking. Rings were chunky, necklaces were heavy, and earrings. Not unless you wanted to look like a pirate or worse. So here you are, dressed in your one outfit, already sweating, scratching, and slipping, wondering how people did this every day. The answer is, they didn't have a choice. This was just life. Nobody cared if you looked cute. You were dressed for work, for mud, for survival. You think Crocs and hoodies are ugly? Try medieval hose and turn shoes, my friend. You'd trade a kidney for a t-shirt. But hey, at least you blend in now. You're just another scratchy peasant trying to make it through the day without freezing your butt off or catching fleas. And the best part, you'll be wearing this exact same outfit tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that, until it literally falls apart on your body. Alright, so you're dressed in your scratchy medieval outfit and already regretting being alive. But hey, maybe you can clean up a bit, right? Maybe wash your face, brush your teeth, freshen up before facing the day. Nope, not in this century. Hygiene in the Middle Ages was less self-care routine and more try not to die from your own filth. First off, there are no bathrooms. You might have a wooden bucket called a chamber pot, which everyone shares, and that gets dumped, wait for it, right into the street. Yeah, people just chuck their business out the window and yell, "Garde-lou," which basically means watch out for poop. And if you don't move fast enough, congratulations, you're baptised in human waste. Bathing? Let's talk about that. Most common folks didn't bathe regularly. Not because they didn't want to, but because getting hot water was a nightmare. You had to gather wood, light a fire, boil water, carry it in buckets, and fill a wooden tub that leaks half the time. Then you'd sit in it, along with the dirt, grime, and fleas you brought in. If you were in a big family, they reuse the bath water, so by the time it's your turn, it's basically human soup. Some towns had bathhouses, sure, but those were either for the rich or shady as heck, doubling as brothels. And even when you did bathe, people thought doing it too often could make you sick. Some believed water opened your pores and let in disease, so instead of scrubbing, people would just mask the stench with herbs, flowers, or, if you're rich, perfume that smells like crushed roses mixed with desperation. Let's talk dental hygiene. Your teeth hurt just thinking about it. There are no toothbrushes, no floss, no dentist you actually want to visit. Some folks chewed mint or used sticks to scrape off grime, and occasionally they rubbed ashes or salt on their gums. That's it. If your tooth went bad, a local barber might yank it out with pliers while two guys held you down. No anaesthesia, no numbing, just screaming and prayers. And you know what's wild? A lot of people just lived with rotting teeth, hoping they'd fall out naturally. Breath in medieval times was a biohazard. Armpits, same deal. No deodorant. You might rub sage or rosemary under your arms if you're lucky, but mostly you just smell like sweat, onions, and regret. And remember, everyone's in the same boat, so no one really notices how bad everyone smells. It's just part of the background ambience, like smoke, manure, and boiled cabbage. And speaking of smells, let's not forget the animals. Pigs, chickens, goats, they lived with you or right next door. Animal waste was everywhere. You had to watch where you stepped constantly. And flies. Oh boy, the flies, they were everywhere, buzzing in your food, your eyes, and all the things you'd rather not think about. Let's talk laundry. You probably think, well, at least I can wash my clothes, right? Sort of. Laundry meant hauling clothes to a river, beating them with sticks, and rubbing them with lye soap, which was made from ashes and animal fat and could literally burn your skin. And because clothes took forever to dry, you didn't wash them often. Most folks just let dirt cake in and hoped it would fall off on its own. And when it comes to feminine hygiene, things get even rougher. Women didn't have pads or tampons, they used rags, hence the phrase, on the rag, which were rinsed and reused, if they even had access to fabric for that. If not, they just dealt with it, and went about their day doing chores while hiding any stains as best they could. Now let's talk about the real fun. Lice, fleas and boils. Everyone had them. Rich, poor, didn't matter. Your hair was a bug buffet. People used special combs to get lice out, or just shaved their heads and wore wigs. Fleas lived in your bedding and your clothes, and you basically couldn't get rid of them. Boils, sores, weird rashes, those were just your body's way of telling you, I give up. And don't even ask about toilet paper. It didn't exist. You used whatever was nearby, moss, hay, leaves, or even your hand. Water for cleaning? Rare. Soap? Maybe once in a blue moon. Public toilets? Only in big cities, and even then they were wooden holes over a stream full of... yeah, you get it. And for rural folks, it was just a pit in the ground, or the woods. So hygiene wasn't just inconvenient, it was dangerous. Dirty conditions led to disease, and nobody knew how germs worked. People thought sickness came from bad air, or sins, or the alignment of planets. So you could get sick just from being alive and nobody would know how to help you. They might bleed you, slap on some herbs, or chant prayers. But hygiene as a form of prevention? Not a thing. So here you are, stinky, itchy, maybe infected, and you've only been awake for a couple hours. Your breath is radioactive, your clothes feel like burlap sandpaper, and something is crawling on your scalp. You think about modern showers, clean socks, and minty toothpaste, and wonder how anyone in the Middle Ages made it past 30. Spoiler, a lot of them didn't. Alright, so you've eaten your brick of bread, pulled on your itchy outfit, and come to terms with your body odour. It's time to head outside and see what medieval town life is really like. But the second you step out your door, you realise this place wants you dead. The street isn't really a street. It's a chaotic mudslide filled with animal droppings, broken wood, sharp rocks, and at least 3 different smells that shouldn't exist. There's no pavement, no sidewalks, and no rules. People are dumping waste out of windows. Chickens are flapping around like they own the place. And some guy just walked past you carrying a dead pig on his back like it's no big deal. You dodge a suspicious puddle, only to step right into something worse. And now your shoes, if you can call them that, are soaked with whatever that was. There are carts rolling by with loose wheels, kids throwing rocks, and someone yelling about stolen turnips. There's no police, no garbage trucks, and no streetlights. Just chaos and mud. Everywhere, all the time. If it rains, the roads flood. If it's dry, you're choking on dust and flies. You try to stick to the edge, but the buildings lean inward like they're plotting to collapse, and random stuff drips from above. Mostly rainwater, sometimes chamber pot leftovers. There are no gutters, no drainage systems, and definitely no personal space. You walk past the butcher's stall and instantly regret it. There's blood everywhere, and he's chopping meat on a wooden block that probably hasn't been washed since the last plague. Flies are swarming, and dogs are lurking nearby hoping for scraps. You catch a whiff of something rancid, turn the corner, and walk right into a man who's skinning a rabbit in public, like it's casual Monday business. Welcome to the marketplace. It's loud, filthy, and full of shouting. Vendors are yelling about fish, bread, ale, and cloth, and most of them don't wash their hands. Everything smells like sweat, smoke, and spoiled fruit. There's a guy selling questionable sausages next to a woman hawking medicinal herbs that look suspiciously like weeds. Everyone's trying to haggle, and if you don't know the lingo or local customs, you'll get ripped off faster than you can say, "How much for that turnip?" And don't even think about wandering off. If you get lost, you're in trouble. There are no street signs, no addresses, and the town layout is about as organised as spilled soup. Half the alleys lead nowhere, and the other half lead to danger. You might stumble into a tavern filled with drunk men arguing about goats, or worse, a shady part of town where thieves hang out looking for easy targets. Like you. Because guess what? Crime's a thing, and it's not subtle. Pickpockets are everywhere, and if you look confused, you're basically a walking donation box. If someone accuses you of stealing, or says you looked at their wife wrong, you could get dragged off to the stocks or worse, put on trial by fire, water, or, let's see if they survive this beating, legal protection. Ha, you're not a noble, you're barely a person. And speaking of law and order, there's no police force. There might be a town watch or a bailiff, but they're underpaid, half drunk, and more interested in bribes than justice. If something bad happens to you, you're probably on your own. unless you can scream loud enough for a mob to form. But mobs aren't exactly known for fairness. You could end up on the wrong end of a pitchfork if someone starts a rumour about you being a witch or cursed. And yes, people believed in all kinds of weird stuff. Witches, demons, spirits, and magical goats. You name it. If something bad happens, someone's getting blamed, and the townsfolk are always ready for a good old-fashioned public freak-out. And if you think you can hide out in nature, bad news. The woods are worse. They're full of bandits, wolves, and superstitions. Most people are too scared to even go near them, especially at night. No GPS, no phones, no light. Just trees howling. And the crushing realisation that you are alone in a time where people vanish all the time and nobody investigates. Even travelling is dangerous. Roads are bad, wagons break, horses go lame, and there's always the chance you'll get stopped by some local lord demanding a toll, or just robbing you outright because he can. Travel meant risk. Most folks never left their village for a reason, and if you did make it out, there's still the issue of disease. People are coughing everywhere, and no one covers their mouths. If there's a plague or outbreak, good luck. There's no hospital. Sick people just get locked in their homes or dumped outside the town walls. So just by walking around, you're already risking infection, injury, or insult. There's danger in every direction, and you've only been outside for an hour. And the worst part, this is just a normal day. No invasion, no rebellion, no war. Just regular medieval living. So as you stand there covered in mud, sweating in wool, trying not to breathe too deep, you realise that going outside in medieval times isn't refreshing. It's a full contact sport. And you, my time-travelling friend, are way out of your league. So you've survived the sludge-covered streets, dodged flying sausages and chamber pots, and somehow haven't been accused of witchcraft. Congrats! Now it's time to work, because in medieval times, nobody just chilled. There was no such thing as free time unless you were rich. And since you're definitely not wearing silk and riding a horse, you've got a job to do. But don't get excited. You're not sitting at a desk with ergonomic chairs and coffee breaks. You're probably a peasant, and that means your job is working the land. You wake up before sunrise, haul yourself to the field, and start your day with a wooden plough, a grumpy ox, and soil that feels more like cement. You'll spend the next 10 to 12 hours bending, digging, lifting, and sweating through clothes that haven't been washed since last harvest. Your hands are cracked, your back's already ruined by age 30, and your legs feel like they've been kicking bricks. This isn't gardening. This is survival. If you don't grow enough food, you don't eat. And if the harvest fails, nobody's coming to bail you out. There are no food banks, no backup plans, just hunger and some priest telling you it's God's will. Maybe you're not in the fields. Maybe you're apprenticed to a blacksmith, carpenter, or cobbler. Sounds cool, right? Think again. Apprenticeships are brutal. You work for food and maybe a bed, but you're also scrubbing floors, running errands, and getting yelled at for not knowing how to make a horseshoe on your first day. The master craftsman doesn't care if your hands are blistered. He just wants his tools polished. And this goes on for years. No salary, no weekends off, and no guarantee you'll become a master yourself. If you're lucky, you'll be allowed to learn the trade. If not, you'll just be free labour. Women had jobs too, tons of them, but don't imagine anything glamorous. You're spinning wool until your fingers bleed, brewing beer in smoky kitchens, baking bread in outdoor ovens, or washing clothes in freezing rivers. And you're doing this while raising kids, tending animals, and trying not to die in childbirth, which was one of the leading causes of death for women. That's right, just having a baby could kill you, and people just kind of shrugged about it. Now maybe you're thinking, but what if I was a knight? Well, first of all, you wouldn't be. Knighting costs money. Horses, armour, weapons, training. It's a rich boy's game. But even if you were a knight, it wasn't all jousts and glory. It was blisters, saddle sores, and the constant threat of being chopped in half during some noble's petty war. Chainmail weighed around 40 pounds, and turned you into a slow-cooked stew inside a tin can. And armour, even heavier. Sure, you looked cool, but one wrong move and you drowned trying to cross a river or baked to death under the summer sun. Not to mention actual battle. No mercy, no timeouts, just screaming, hacking and blood. And if you survived, you got to do it all over again next month. Yay! Monks had jobs too, copying manuscripts, tending gardens, running schools. But don't let the robes fool you. Monastery life wasn't all peaceful chanting. It was strict schedules, early wake-ups, constant chores, and vows that included giving up comfort, sleep, and sometimes even talking. Also, lice didn't care if you were holy. They still moved in under your hood and stayed for the winter. You might be thinking about becoming a merchant, travelling, trading, maybe getting rich. But medieval roads were a joke. You'd be lucky to make it 10 miles without your cart breaking or bandits showing up with rusty swords and poor attitudes. Even if you made it, you get taxed at every town gate, cheated by local lords, and maybe tossed in jail if your goods looked suspicious. And if you're caught selling fake stuff or shorting a customer, public punishment, like the stocks or worse. Every job, no matter what it was, came with pain, exhaustion, and usually some level of danger. And forget retirement. You worked until your body gave out. If you got sick or injured, that was it. No insurance, no safety net. Just your family hoping you'd recover or at least die quietly. And the worst part, nobody thought it was strange. That was just life. Everyone around you is missing teeth, covered in dirt, and limping from something. Your neighbour has a permanent hunch from carrying firewood, and the town baker has hands like cracked leather from kneading dough over an open flame for 20 years. There's no such thing as burnout because you were already burnt out at 15. And mental health? Ha! If you acted weird or sad too long, people assumed you were cursed, possessed, or just lazy. So yeah, jobs in the Middle Ages weren't about passion, fulfillment, or following your dreams. They were about not starving. About doing whatever it took to make it to the next day. You weren't climbing the corporate ladder, you were climbing onto the roof with a bucket to patch a hole before it rained again. And you weren't dreaming about vacation. You were dreaming about making it through winter without losing a toe. So as you grip a wooden hoe with blistered hands, covered in sweat, dirt, and hopelessness, it hits you. This isn't just a job. This is a sentence. And you've only served one day. So you're working yourself into an early grave, and sure enough, something goes wrong. Maybe you slice your hand on a rusty blade. Maybe you twist your ankle in the mud. Or maybe you just wake up with a mysterious pain that wasn't there yesterday and now won't go away. Congratulations, it's time to experience medieval healthcare, which is less healing and more hope you survive. First stop, the local healer, who might be a barber, a monk, or some lady who knows a thing or two about herbs, because actual doctors are rare, expensive, and usually clueless. If you're lucky, you get someone who's halfway competent with plants. If not, they'll bleed you. Yep, bleeding. They believed bad blood made you sick, so the go-to move for everything from fever to sadness was to slice you open and drain some of your life juice into a bowl. Sometimes they used leeches, sometimes knives, but either way it was messy, painful, and completely useless. And that's just the beginning. Got a fever? Time for boiled nettle tea and prayers. Got a cough? Here, chew this dried toad. Got a rash? Rub it with vinegar and wrap it in old sheet wool. Oh, and don't forget the astrology chart, because many healers believed your sickness depended on the stars. Mercury in retrograde. Guess you're dying. They had no idea how germs worked. People thought disease came from bad air, imbalanced humours, or even divine punishment. Washing your hands? Almost no one did it. In fact, sometimes doctors would go from treating one patient to the next without cleaning anything. And since surgical tools were basically garden scissors, you can imagine how many infections that caused. Speaking of surgery, it existed, but it was nightmare fuel. There were no anaesthetics besides maybe some ale or a sharp stick to bite. You want that infected leg cut off. Hope you're cool with feeling every second of it. Broken bone? They might splint it. Might. But if it heals wrong, too bad. Enjoy your new permanent limp. And let's not even talk about dental care. Remember that toothache from earlier? It's back, and now your face is swollen. The cure? Yank the tooth out. No numbing, no sterile tools, just a guy with strong arms and rusty pliers. You'll scream, they'll hold you down. And afterwards they might pack the hole with ashes or mouldy bread because they think it draws out the poison. If it gets infected, you die. Slowly. And people just kind of accept it. Midwives were the closest thing to real medical heroes, especially for women. They helped deliver babies, offered herbal remedies, and knew all the local health gossip. But even they were working with limited tools and zero formal training. Childbirth was terrifying. Women could bleed out, get infections, or die from something as simple as the baby being in the wrong position. And if the child was stillborn, people might whisper that it was a punishment or a curse. Mental illness. Forget it. If you had anxiety, depression, or hallucinations, people didn't try to help you. They tried to avoid you. Or worse, they locked you up, chained you to a post, or accused you of being possessed. Some were exorcised, beaten or drowned in holy water to cleanse the soul. Others were just tossed into the streets to fend for themselves. Hospitals did exist, usually run by religious orders, but they weren't like today's clean, sterile environments. They were dark, crowded, and filled with the smell of rotting wounds and incense. Nurses were often nuns or volunteers with no training, and the focus was more on spiritual healing than physical help. You didn't go to a hospital to get better. You went there to die with a priest nearby. And diseases. Oh man, this was the golden age of horrifying plagues. Smallpox, dysentery, typhoid, leprosy, and of course the Black Death. If you caught the plague, you got giant boils, fever, vomiting, and then death. Fast. Sometimes your whole town got wiped out in a week. The treatment was usually isolation, herbal fumes and crossing your fingers. Some people wore masks stuffed with herbs, hoping the scent would block out the bad air. Others whipped themselves in public to show God how sorry they were. Nothing worked. And let's not forget about amputations, cauterization, aka burning wounds shut with hot iron, and all the other brutal methods used to cure people. It wasn't healing, it was surviving trauma and calling it medicine. So here you are, holding your infected hand, trying not to faint as a man in a blood-stained apron sharpens a knife and tells you it'll only hurt for a minute. There's no antiseptic, no antibiotics, no second opinions. Just trust, luck, and maybe a prayer. And if you don't make it, well, someone will dig a shallow grave, toss you in, and life will go on. Because in medieval times, sickness wasn't a crisis, it was just part of the routine. And as you sit there woozy, bleeding, and swatting at flies, you finally understand. Getting hurt in this era isn't an inconvenience. It's a death sentence wrapped in superstition and pain. So maybe next time, watch where you step. And maybe don't trust a guy with leeches in his pocket. So let's say you've survived the plague, the bad bread, the leech guy, and the guy who sells questionable sausages. You might think you're free to live your life how you want now, right? Not even close. Because in medieval times, the church wasn't just a Sunday stop. It was your boss, your guide, your judge, and your babysitter, all rolled into one. Whether you were a peasant, a merchant, or even a noble, the church controlled pretty much every part of your life. You wake up to the sound of church bells, not because you're religious, but because they tell you when to work, when to rest, and when to feel guilty. Religion wasn't optional. It was the air you breathed. Everyone went to Mass. Even if you didn't understand Latin, which most people didn't, you still stood there nodding like you got it, while the priest mumbled in a language that sounded like magical chanting. And if you didn't show up, people noticed. Not going to church made you suspicious, and being suspicious in medieval times usually meant you ended up on fire. Tithing was mandatory too. That means even if you barely scraped together enough grain to eat, you still had to give 10% to the church. They didn't mess around either. If you didn't pay up, they could excommunicate you, which basically meant spiritual doom. No heaven for you, just eternal flames and probably an unpaid grain debt. And the church wasn't just collecting donations, It was also teaching your kids, running the local hospital, and keeping all the records. Births, deaths, marriages. It all went through the church. If you wanted to get married, you needed a priest. If you wanted to be buried in the right spot, you needed a priest. If you sneezed funny and thought it might be a sign from God, yep, you needed a priest. They were everywhere, in every town, and they had serious power. They could accuse you of heresy, which was basically the medieval version of you said something we don't like. And suddenly you're on trial. Trials weren't exactly fair either. Sometimes they'd tie a rock to you and throw you in a river. If you floated, you were guilty. If you sank, well, you were innocent, but also dead. It was a lose-lose situation sponsored by divine justice. And don't forget about relics. Churches claim to have pieces of saints, bones of apostles, or the fingernail of some long-dead holy guy. People would travel miles to see this stuff, hoping it could cure their diseases or bring them blessings. Was any of it real? Who knows? But people believed hard, and that belief ruled everything. If a bishop said your illness was caused by demons, you believed it. If the village priest told you to fast for a week, you did it. The church calendar ran the entire year. There were so many religious holidays that it's a miracle any work got done. You couldn't eat meat on certain days, couldn't dance or sing on others, and heaven forbid you do anything fun during Lent. Even your thoughts weren't safe. Thinking bad things could be sinful. Acting on them? Definitely sinful. You'd have to confess everything to your priest, even if it was just a dream about stealing bread. And after confession, penance. That could be anything from saying a bunch of prayers to crawling on your knees through a cold stone church for 2 hours. And let's talk about hell, because they did. A lot. The church loved reminding everyone that hell was very real, very hot, and waiting for anyone who broke the rules. There were paintings and sermons filled with demons poking people, boiling souls in cauldrons and fire licking at your heels. It wasn't subtle, and it definitely wasn't kid-friendly. Everyone lived with this constant pressure. Be good or burn. And being good wasn't always clear. If a crop failed, if someone got sick, if lightning struck the barn, it was probably because someone nearby sinned. People got paranoid. Witches, sinners, outsiders. Anyone who seemed different could be blamed. And the church didn't exactly calm things down. Sometimes they fanned the flames. Literally. Public executions of heretics were events. Everyone gathered around, brought snacks, and watched someone get burned at the stake. For most people, that was the closest thing to Netflix. And while the church did do good things, education, charity, and keeping knowledge alive, it also hoarded power. Priests couldn't marry, but they often had side arrangements. Monasteries were supposed to be humble, but many got filthy rich. Bishops wore gold and lived like kings. The Pope? He was basically a medieval CEO with an army. You weren't just living in a kingdom, you were also living in a spiritual empire, and stepping out of line meant risking your soul, your reputation, and sometimes your life. So as you kneel in a cold stone church, repeating prayers you barely understand, watching smoke from incense curl toward the rafters, you finally realise this isn't just religion, it's rule. The church owns your time, your money, your behaviour, and even your fears. You're not just trying to survive, you're trying to be holy enough not to end up in a painting of eternal torment. And it turns out being righteous in the Middle Ages was even harder than just staying alive. Okay, you've worked yourself into exhaustion, survived the plague doctor's salad of herbs and prayers, and managed not to get burned for heresy. So surely you've earned some fun, right? Kind of. Entertainment in medieval times was like everything else. Gritty, chaotic, and slightly dangerous. There's no Netflix, no Wi-Fi, no scrolling through videos of cats wearing armour. If you want entertainment, you've got to go find it, and hope it doesn't bite you back. First up, festivals. When they happened, they were wild. Picture an entire village throwing down like it's their only shot at joy before winter sets in. There were feasts with whatever food hadn't gone mouldy, beer flowing like a medieval frat party, and music played by people who owned exactly 3 instruments, and no idea how to tune them. You'd hear the lute, the bagpipes, and maybe a drum that doubled as someone's cooking pot. People danced in circles until their legs gave out, and nobody cared if you had rhythm. Just don't fall into the bonfire. And if it was a big holy day, they might stage a miracle play in the town square, complete with costumes, badly painted scenery, and someone awkwardly pretending to be God. Then you had the games, some of which would get you arrested today. There was bear baiting, which is exactly what it sounds like, tying up a bear and letting dogs attack it while people cheered. Cockfighting too, with crowds packed around two birds going full Mortal Kombat. If you didn't like animal violence, well, there weren't a lot of options because most fun involved some kind of blood. Jousts were a big deal if you lived near a noble household. Knights would slam into each other with wooden lances while wearing 50 pounds of metal, and the crowd would go wild, especially if someone got knocked out or trampled. And if you thought that was dramatic, public executions were treated like social events. Hangings, beheadings, even burnings. People brought the kids, grabbed some snacks and made a day of it. Nothing says family bonding like watching someone get drawn and quartered. But it wasn't all death and mayhem. Sometimes the town would get a travelling troupe of performers. Jugglers, acrobats, jesters, and musicians who travelled from village to village, entertaining for coins and crusts of bread. These folks were basically medieval influencers, except their likes were actual cheers and their worst case scenario was getting run out of town. Storytelling was a huge part of medieval downtime. With no books for most people, someone who could spin a good tale was basically a living library. People would gather around the hearth while Grandma, Uncle Gareth, or the weird neighbour who talks to birds told stories about dragons, saints, or local. Ghosts. Some were hilarious, some were terrifying, and some were just bizarre. Either way, it beat staring at the wall. And let's not forget taverns. If you had a few spare coins or could charm the innkeeper, you could grab a wooden mug of warm ale and sit around listening to drunk guys argue about who could wrestle a cow. There was singing, off-key but enthusiastic, and sometimes a guy with a flute who knew 4 songs and played them all on loop. It was loud, smelly, and packed wall to wall, but it was one of the few places people could unwind without milking a goat or grinding grain. Kids had their own games too, stuff like rolling hoops, playing tag, or chasing each other with sticks pretending to be knights. They made dolls from scraps, carved toys from wood, or just made mud pies and threw them at each other until someone cried. No screens, no batteries, just imagination and an endless supply of dirt. And if you were really lucky, your village might have a fair, with booths for archery, wrestling matches, pie-eating contests. Okay, maybe not pies, more like hard bread munching. And even puppet shows featuring weird little cloth people, acting out moral lessons or naughty jokes, depending on how brave the puppeteer felt. But even fun had rules. The church kept a close eye on what counted as acceptable entertainment. Too much dancing? Sinful. Singing lewd songs? Very sinful. Laughing too loud during Lent? Extra sinful. You could go from clapping at a puppet show to getting lectured by a priest in under 5 minutes. And if you were a woman, you had to be extra careful. Too much laughing, too much attention, or too good at dancing. And boom, people start whispering about witches. Because of course they did. Entertainment was also seasonal. Winter meant storytelling, songs and trying not to freeze. Summer meant outdoor games, drunken singing, and trying not to die of heat stroke in a wool tunic. Either way, people found ways to enjoy themselves, even if half those ways involve fire, animals, or someone yelling, "Fight, fight," while circling up. So now it's night time, your belly's full of bad beer and crusty stew, and someone's playing a bagpipe badly, while a juggler tosses flaming sticks a little too close to your face. You're tired, dirty, and slightly worried about the guy in the corner who keeps staring like he's never seen shoes before. But you're smiling. Because somehow, this chaos is actually kind of fun. Sure, there's mud in your teeth, and someone might lose an eyebrow before the night's over, but for once, nobody's ploughing a field, sewing in the dark, or bleeding out on the floor. This, by medieval standards, is a party. And honestly, It beats getting whipped for looking at a noble the wrong way. So it's the end of your medieval day, if you can even call it a day and not a low-budget survival horror experience. You've trudged through mud, eaten food that hates you, wore an outfit that feels like punishment, survived a plague-themed episode of medieval ER, and now you're crawling back to your drafty hut with fleas in your socks and 1,000-yard stare in your eyes. There's no electric light, so the sun's gone and now you've got a flickering candle or a smoking oil lamp that barely lights up your sad wooden table. The air smells like sweat, cabbage, damp straw, and maybe just a little bit of defeat. You sit on your straw mattress, which now itches in places you didn't know could itch, and listen to the sounds of the village winding down. A dog barking, a baby crying, someone vomiting outside after a bit too much ale and bad stew. And somewhere in the distance, church bells tolling because even your bedtime needs divine approval. You lie there staring at the rafters, and suddenly the whole day hits you like a plague cart. You woke up freezing, you brushed your teeth with sadness. You worked yourself half to death, got insulted by a goat, and sat through a puppet show featuring a demon and a turnip. You've never been more exhausted, sore, or spiritually broken. And it's only been one day. Just one. Tomorrow it all starts again. More bread that could double as a brick. More labour that ruins your spine. More fear of disease. Church lectures. Itchy clothes and streets that double as open-air toilets. There's no social media to complain on. No memes to cope with. No modern medicine to keep you alive when your blister gets infected. There's no privacy, no heating, no bathrooms, no coffee, no rights, and no backup plan. You start thinking about the future, the real one, the one you came from. A world where you have options, where showers have water pressure, where food comes hot and seasoned, where you can get a vaccine instead of a blessing, and a band-aid instead of a bloodletting. You remember your bed, your phone, your sweatpants. You remember ice cream. You remember not being scared of stepping outside and slipping on poop. And suddenly, everything about the 21st century that used to annoy you, the long lines, the traffic, the email spam, feels like a luxury vacation compared to the madness you just lived through. Because yeah, modern life has its problems, but you're not trying to survive rats, war, superstition, and dental care from someone whose only qualification is owns pliers. Medieval times weren't just rough, they were relentless. You didn't live, you endured. Everything you did was for survival. Fun was rare, safety was temporary, and your average life expectancy was basically, don't make plans. If you made it to 40, you were a legend. And now here you are, curled up in a cold hut with a straw mattress, sore legs, and the crushing realisation that time travel was a terrible idea. There's no going back tonight, but you'd trade your soul for a hot shower, a microwave burrito, and a soft pillow that doesn't smell like hay and sadness. You finally drift off to sleep as a cold draft rolls through the cracks in the wall, and someone outside screams about a demon in the well. And as your eyes close, the last thought in your head is simple. I wouldn't last one more day of this. And you wouldn't. None of us would. Because no matter how many medieval shows we binge, no matter how romantic the castles and dragons look, real medieval life wasn't a fantasy. It was hard, filthy, unfair, painful, and exhausting. It was a test of endurance every single day, and most people didn't get to choose their own fate. You were born into your role, you worked until your body gave out, and you hoped, just maybe, you wouldn't die from a splinter. So the next time you complain about bad Wi-Fi or cold coffee, just remember, it could be worse. You could be sleeping in a wooden shack with a goat for a roommate, a festering blister on your foot, and a full day of mud, work and mystery stew waiting for you in the morning. Be thankful for the century you live in, because after spending just one day in the Middle Ages, you know the truth. You absolutely, 100% would not have made it.